We do feel like that we have though done a good job of containing and being able to continue with operations throughout the whole pandemic. So appreciate everybody's support, the judges, the sheriffs, community members, community providers, LMHAs. Everybody's been very supportive of continuing to keep things moving with the hospitals. But I think that's the end of my report. Thanks.
Judge Blank, can I take a minute to give you a number that I think is relevant?
Sure, Dr. Fabello.
Yeah, just so to follow up on Mike, as of yesterday, there are 1,938 positive virus confirmation in Texas jails, 9,354 inmates in quarantine, and 633 jailers that are in quarantine, and a bunch of pending results. We monitor this every day, and the number of jails have gone from 5 early March to over 50 jails now with COVID-19. If you apply the standard, I don't know, 25%, because we don't have these numbers as we have talked about, but if you do 25% out of that 9,354, a couple of thousand are people that probably have a mental health screening saying that they have a mental illness. So that's the size of that problem, just so you know.
All right, thank you for those numbers, and Mike, thank you very much for that report. Next on the list, I see that in for Dr. Keller today is John Petrillo.
Thank you. Thanks, Judge.
Good morning.
Good morning. One nice thing about Zoom, you can see over the last 4 months who's ventured out to get their hair cut or not. So there is that. As sort of just a personal note, Mike's waving his hand. He's not. I've not. So, so leaving that aside, 3 points I want to make quickly, and they're, I think, related to what Mike's already talked about and Tony as well. The first is that, as many of you know, there's been a number of communities, San Antonio, Houston, Austin, Dallas, and others that have tried to rethink how they do initial encounters with people with mental illness in response to a 911 call. And in Dallas, as one example, the initiation is something called Right Care, which involves a paramedic, a mental health professional, and a law enforcement person responding to mental health calls through the 911 center. We're getting a lot of calls from cities in Texas, cities around the country interested in that approach. And I think the relevance of it, even pre-COVID, was that it is an effort to try to make initial response to mental health crises more medically facing than law enforcement, as we do with other diseases. But I think in the aftermath of COVID, of George Floyd and sort of calls to reform policing, one of the things we want to do generally as a society, I think, is minimize to the degree possible police encounters, both for safety of police, safety of people in jail, as Tony just mentioned, and to try to make sure folks get to services as quickly as possible. And so the interest in medically facing crisis response seems to be growing, and I think it's being accelerated, in fact, by what's happening with COVID and with the aftermath of George Floyd. So that's the first point. The second, which is also related to it, is we're working closely with Pew Trust, potentially some other national foundations, and a number of communities on a major initiative that Pew is mounting on to try to target a handful of counties around the country to invest in rethinking how crisis response occurs. And Adrian Kennedy and folks at NAMI have been very supportive of that. It's based in part on work
to go out to prosecutors statewide. And so thank you for that, Justice Hervey, and for all the funding. We also had a TDCAA conference scheduled on mental health regionals, but it looks like we'll be going virtually. I had recent conversations in that regard. And also I want to let you know that although Harris County is the largest jurisdiction, we do try to do some training here in our jurisdiction. We've done in-house at our DA's office. You know, we have a large DA's office here. Our victim assistance coordinators and our social workers, some in-house training that we've just done recently. And we have some upcoming training for our attorneys in the office as well. I want to mention too, Houston Bar Association has their upcoming bench bar conference, which was canceled. Criminal trial and appellate bench bar conference. It was canceled in April, but it is coming up in September. We're doing it virtually. And there will be a panel on mental health from our jurisdiction that will be training in regard to the programs and things like that. So super positive in that regard, and a lot of things going on. So thank you all for your hard work.
Denise, thank you. And it's great to have Harris County and all the work they're doing to share that with everyone in the state. And I know it's been the basis for pilot projects in other places in the state, and the work that you are doing, 3,000 diverted, that's amazing that you and Tom and all the people in Harris County that are involved in mental health that are doing.
I have read the first parts of the book that they're putting together, and it's very, very thorough. So I applaud the efforts of the prosecutors. It's very good.
Thank you, Judge Hervey. That means a lot coming from you. We appreciate it.
Okay, great. And next is Beth Mitchell.
Beth, you're muted.
Yeah.
Thank you, Brian. Yeah, sorry, great to see everybody. I just wanted to my role really is seeing what happens from people who are actually going through the process and what they're going through. And so I don't want to discount all of the hard work that everybody's doing and continues to do, which I think is necessary. But I do want to point out that, as Denise suggested, the wait list from February till now has gone up by 400 people. So in February, it was around 800, and now the wait list is at 1,200. And that's for the forensic population. Sonia had talked about the 100, that was for just the civil wait list, but the forensic wait list has gone up by over 400 people since February. And so we still have a lot of work to do to ensure that we are moving people in a more timely manner in and out of the system. I know that we've worked really hard to get these Zoom meetings going, but we are getting consistent calls that that courts are not holding hearings. They're just extending the commitment hearings without actually having hearings right now. And that's been pretty much across the state. And so we can't move the system if we don't have hearings to move people into more of the outpatient programs that are available. And I think that's also with, when we talk about some of the programs or some of the legislation that we're working on is to try to move that process along quicker so that we can get more people into or out of the system, so more people can come back into the system. So I do think the legislation is really important at this time. One other thing I think we need to think about, and that we hear from a lot of people, is that these clients often don't have phones or computers, and so although all of the Zoom meetings are great for us who have the capacity to have these computers, when they're trying to access services that are only being able to be provided virtually right now, they don't get the same abilities that the rest of us do if we have a teledoc appointment where we can talk to our doctor via Zoom and they can see us and we can see them. And so if this goes on longer, I think, we need to think about providing other ways and other means to ensure that people have more access to their providers because of that. So just some things to think about. Like I said, I think everybody's really trying hard and doing, a lot of work, but we're still fighting an uphill battle at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Beth. It's important to hear that perspective and keep that perspective in mind all the while we're doing this work. And it's really good to hear from someone who knows what's happening close to the ground. Next, I think we have Beth Lawson from Lubbock to talk about what's going on in Lubbock.
Hi, good morning. It is so good
to see each of you. I want to take just a quick second and say to Justice Bland, thank you so much for leading our group. I know it's kind of old news, but you are in a relatively new role in the facilitation of this group with Judge Hervey. And so thank you for your leadership. I wanted to also thank the two task force that have been working together so diligently. When I read the document as it came out yesterday, I was overwhelmed by the amount of really good work that has been done toward the legislative priorities and the reports and moving forward. And so thank you to those of you who have been working so diligently since we last met. Just a quick plug to say the local authority system is up and running and working very, very diligently to support people as they deal with the COVID-19 pandemic. As Beth Mitchell mentioned, not everyone has the same resources. And so we have been, as a system, super creative in helping people access services they need, whether that's people going out and making visits curbside, or whether it's buying cell phones for patients so they can have their video or audio visits. It's been pretty remarkable. Piggyback also on what Commissioner Gaines said about the crisis hotline for COVID-19. We as local authorities have seen people accessing our system that don't normally access our system. Star Care in Lubbock is actually one of the crisis counseling program sites for a big area of West Texas. We're receiving calls from first responders, from teachers. It's quite amazing the people who and the all walks of life have come to us in support of needing support for the COVID-19. I will concur with others who have said life marches on, and that it's quite amazing to me how the local mental health authority system has been so resilient into switching to more of a virtual online platform and trying to deal with the perils that are there as well. I'm hearing anecdotally, and I know firsthand from our perspective, that we actually, ironically, are having better show rates in our outpatient clinic now that we have additional modalities for those visits in terms of audio and then visual, and then just the multiple platforms that are available to patients. Our patients describe liking the flexibility in terms of they don't have to drive, they don't have to get a ride, they don't have to spend 6 hours on the bus. And so I think it's important as we move forward, something that I've been talking with my executive team and our board and other leadership in the local mental health authority system, is that we must not lose any of the advances that we've made because of COVID-19. We very quickly shifted to different service modalities, and we have found that our participation in care is actually improved in certain venues. Of course, there's never going to be a substitute for face-to-face treatment. Of course, we're just like the fire department. We're just like the police force. We're out there. That we didn't stop because of COVID-19. Maybe I work from home more. Maybe I've got executive staff that do things more by Zoom, but I've got people out, PPE, they're up, they're out, they're seeing people, and we're helping people as we would before, but in addition to that, navigate through the stressors of COVID-19. And so I agree 100% with the conversation that Judge Hervey said, and then also with Professor Shannon about we must continue to march forth with our charges for this commission. Despite what's going on in the world, now is not the time to let our foot off the gas, and that we as a local mental health authority system are dedicated to participating in the evolution and support of whatever we need to be doing to support people best. Again, thank you for everything that everyone's doing. It's fabulous to see you. I'm a extroverted, touchy-feely people person, and it is really hard for me to only see my husband and my dog.
Thank you for that report, Beth. And that's a really important point that you bring up, and that the skills that we've acquired and the tools in the toolbox that we've, adapted to try to make things work in the time of COVID. Those are important skills and tools that we should absolutely bring forward and not lose. And as you know, hopefully we see an end to the restrictions caused by the pandemic. And Major Lee, I think you're up next.
Good morning. It's good to see everybody.
Good morning.
Yeah, this has definitely been a trying time for law enforcement. I know it's a trying time for everyone with COVID, but as you're all aware that a lot of the spotlight has been on law enforcement around the nation and the needs for reform. And so some days I come to work, I'm not sure if I'm a law enforcement major or if I'm a cheerleader in chief, because trying to keep morale up in law enforcement is a tough challenge right now. And on the serious side, I mean, literally a day does not go by that I do not have a resignation or a retirement put on my desk, which is not good. I know law enforcement agencies across the nation are experiencing that at significant rates. So it's tough times. Our jail, I'm proud of our staff here. I mean, I know early on, Harris County Jail was one of the top 10 hotspots for COVID in the nation. I think our medical staff, our mental health staff, and our jail employees, I mean, I just applaud them for suiting up every day and going into that environment. And they've done a tremendous job of trying to keep it under control. We've had hundreds of employees impacted and come down with COVID. Fortunately, we've only lost, I've lost 2 deputies. I've lost a couple of jailers to COVID, but we're getting through this, so it's good to see everybody. Just to follow up real quickly on Denise's comments about the diversion center, we're very proud of that. We are approaching 3,000. I think today's report was just over 2,800 people that we've diverted from going to jail for Class B minor offenses that had a mental health component associated with it. And that's to be distinguished between the thousands that we take every year to our crisis drop-off center for persons that were often also committing a crime, minor offense, but they were in crisis and they go to a different facility. So we're proud of the programs that we're putting in place, and we continue to tweak them. It's not perfect. Matter of fact, we have a meeting this afternoon with our district attorney's office and the Houston Police Department and all of our partners about how we can further optimize our ability to intercept individuals actually at the Joint Processing Center prior to booking and redirect them to this diversion center. Another item I wanted to just share, since the last time we met, one of the other projects we've been working on for the last year was our telehealth program with our deputies. And that was a pilot with the Arnold Foundation and U of H as partners. And we were fortunate to take that to Commissioner's Court a couple months ago and show them the results. And Commissioner's Court funded that for the tune of right at $995,000 a year, which allowed us to expand that program to 100 of our patrol deputies, which now 100 of our Harris County patrol deputies have iPads in their car that has a direct connection to a mental health professional. So, that is huge to be able to bring that type of service. Our stats showed that approximately 70% of all the scenes that they use that device on, they are able to resolve it, which means they didn't take the person to jail. They didn't even need to take them to a hospital. Our ERs are clogged up. Taking persons to ERs during COVID has been very challenging, as you can imagine. And then just finally, just to follow up on some of the comments that Dr. Petrulia made earlier about, this is there's a lot of discussion about police reform. What types of other alternatives are there? How can we take some of the burden off law enforcement? And I will tell the group, look, you're not going to find anybody that's more in favor of removing some of these social issues, such as responding to persons with mental health needs and homeless individuals, or just a myriad of social issues that, for whatever reason, over the decades have been placed in the hands of law enforcement. You're not going to find anyone any more supportive of those concepts them police leaders themselves. We would love to see these types of calls being redirected from police to the appropriate type of response. How that looks, there are some great examples. I've been seeing some of the chats, some of the programs up in Oregon, some around the country. We have been in communication with some of these programs. We are taking a close look. I mean, we know our statistics here. I mean, we know that in Harris County, just the sheriff's office alone, this is not including our city partners, but between both agencies, we probably respond to about 80,000 calls a year involving someone with just mental health issues or homelessness issues. And we took a look at those just a week ago, and right at 80% of those have no indicator of violence at all involved. So I think there's a huge opportunity as we take a look at these non-law enforcement type responses about how we could redirect, up to maybe 80% of these calls coming through 911 to a non-law enforcement response that could more appropriately handle the situation, reduce the odds of the situation turning violent, and get that person to the appropriate care. So, but in closing, as we take a look at those types of programs, one thing that's been apparent is that another thing that your biggest cheerleaders would be as law enforcement leaders around the state is that not only have these issues been dumped in the, and I don't want to say dumped, it's because there's gaps. A lot of times the gap is just hours of service. A lot of programs or services that would benefit that person better than a police response to their home. Well, there are agencies that operate, Monday through Friday, 8 to 5, and everybody knows, 911 is always open. So that's been part of the problem. And then second, part of the problem is that even as we look at these alternative responses, police over the years, the legislature has empowered only the police to take someone in against their will. And I know a lot of you may have, in your mind, when you envision taking someone in on an EDO against their will, always involves a battle. We're having to literally, physically restrain that individual, and that's not the case. I mean, a lot of times against their will is just, the person just verbally tells us they don't want to go to the hospital, so we have to take them anyway because of their situation. I truly think that as we look at alternative responses, this is a great opportunity. And I know a lot's been mentioned about what's going to happen in this upcoming session. And I know a lot of it's going to be about budget and budget cuts. But I also know for a fact, talking to Representative Coleman and Senator Whitmire, that law enforcement reform is going to be a huge topic up there. And they already have big plans to try to do things. And so I think it's a great opportunity that we need to keep an eye out for that how, does that mean changing up the laws so we don't only rely on police having that ability? So if a MCOT or mobile crisis team is at a house and the person is verbalizing they don't want to go to the hospital and they don't want to take their meds, but they could nudge that person to the hospital without having to call the police. Because as we talked to the folks in Oregon with the Cahoots program and all that, the fact is they still have to call the police 20 to 25% of the time because their hands are tied at that point. And I think that's something worthy of taking a look at this session, is there an opportunity to remove the barrier to emergency detention to where it's only law enforcement? I mean, could it be mental health professionals? Could it be our EMS services? And so I'll stop there. It's great to see everybody. I'm glad everyone's healthy, and appreciate all the work. Took a look at the report last night and it looks great.
Thank you, Major Lee. That's terrific. I don't see any other commissioners that are interested in making a report. And so I'm going to circle back to Dr. Martinez, who had a couple more things to share with us before he had technical issues. I'll just let you know that we scheduled a break for 10:30. We're running a little bit ahead of schedule, which is great. And so I might ask Christy to give her report after Dr. Martinez, and then we'll take the break at the conclusion of her report and pick up with Judge Boyce on the other side. So Dr. Martinez, you ready?
Yes, thank you, Judge Bland. Sorry, everybody, about interconnectivity issues here in Comal County. Part of our new world, right? Just two other issues, more with the commission than with Hogg Foundation. it's really fantastic to hear everything that's going on around the great state of Texas. But it brings a point that I wanted to share with the commissioners. There's 3 major initiatives that Texas has been doing, which I think are fabulous. One of them is this Joint Judicial Commission on Mental Health. The other is the Texas Child's Mental Health Care Consortium. If you recall, $100 million to create a new infrastructure to really deal with the issues of mental health and substance use that are happening with our youth, children and youth. And also the state hospital redesign that Mike was talking about. And it seems to me, as we head into the legislative session, I propose that, and Hogg would be more than happy to help maybe Christy Taylor and the team do this. It seems like the 3 initiatives ought to come together as we think about the legislative session and continuity in ensuring that we're all being value added to each other and that it's actually comprehensive across the board. So I just wanted to throw that out and see if that resonates with my fellow commissioners here, because I think it'd be great for, especially even if it's just the infrastructural folks like Christy Taylor and Luann Southern, who's at TCMHCC, and the folks like Steve Strakowski and stuff, and Steve Pliska out at SASH, who are heading up those initiatives. So I'll leave it there to see what folks think, Judge Bland. And then the second one, listening especially to John Petrilla and especially also Major Lee, and given the fact that COVID-19, and we've seen it, has really highlighted the inequities that unfortunately exist across our society, and especially how it impacts Black and Latinx communities the most in reference to those inequities. And there are long-standing social determinants of health and mental health that have resulted in the increased infectivity rates, hospitalizations, and unfortunately then also mortality that follows. But then the racial justice issues that have bubbled up that Major Lee was referring to, it seems I propose for us as a commission to consider supporting the creation of a health equity office at Health and Human Services Commission. A health equity office could really, at the commission, it seems to me, could really bring together especially the data, the types of studies, the things that we all need to have done, because it's a systems-wide approach, a multi-system, I think, impact that needs to happen. And we're doing that with the Judicial Commission on Mental Health coming together and what it's doing with its Legislative Research Council, what's happening with the state hospitals, and also even with TCMHC. And I just think there's an amazing opportunity here. So I'm not sure where it goes, Judge Bland, for that kind of a concept to at least be considered, that the commission be supportive of that. I think it's going to come up in this legislative session as well. In the Hogg Foundation, as we've looked at how we could help and enhance the mental health system in the state of Texas, having a health equity office, especially at this date and time, and the issues that have now become so much more elevated, would be, I think, a really positive thing that the state of Texas could do on behalf of all its citizenship. So with that, I'll stop, and thank you, Judge Bland, for giving me a little bit more time. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Dr. Martinez. And I think you're right that you and Major Lee are right that we're going to see a lot of work done in this legislative session in the area of mental health and behavioral health and people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And we as a commission should monitor that to see where there's the intersection between the judiciary and these issues, and lend our support where we can to legislation that will advance behavioral and mental health in Texas, and in particular in accord with our mission to improve the administration of justice. So those are all good thoughts that we've heard from all of our commissioners today. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to our executive director, who has done a tremendous job in managing the commission remotely and in putting together this meeting today with her staff. So Christy Taylor, we're ready to hear from you.
Thank you, Justice Bland and Judge Hervey. Hello, everyone, and thank you for your well wishes and notes of support. It's times like this when we find out that we work with lovely people. and hardworking people. I have had many conversations with judges at 11 p.m., 1 a.m., and some of them more than one night in a row. So I see that you are running dockets during the day and working on your JCMH work at night. So thank you very much. Okay, can you see the slide that's up? We are highlighting the annual report. It's actually 2 years that we've put out. Very proud of this work. It's actually required under our order creating the commission that we report to the Supreme Court of Texas and the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals the work that we've done. And it's turned out really well. This cover you see, I think, captures what we're about. We have these wonderful leaders that are highlighting these issues, and we have the staff that I feel like is the glue that keeps the work moving and together. But I wanted to put on the cover, you all, the commissioners that show up time and time again, the collaborative council, who tell us what's really happening when you're in the trenches. So you see we have Adrian Kennedy and Denise Ontken and Major Lee, Steve Willab. That is from our first summit. So we can go ahead and go to the next slide. We are not going to go through all 44 pages of this document. You should have had it emailed. We will put a link on our website and in the chat room. But I did want to show you just a few of the pages. This was documenting the history of the commission. I know sometimes you all are involved in so many organizations that it's nice to have your elevator speech ready. And so here we have shown the history of how our high court came together and created this commission and the visionary leadership that it took to get here. Next slide. And we highlighted our summit. We will again one day all be back together in a room like this, you see, with the 500 people. I think actually today I'm going to ask one of the staff members before we end the meeting. I think we should take a photo of this screen, because I was thinking, what are we going to put in the report next year? Our summit and our meetings will have a different look, but the work is moving on. Next slide. I hope you find your faces in this report. We wanted to show the variety of stakeholders who come together. The bar graph is from the second summit, showing the various disciplines. Okay, next slide. We also wanted to show our partnerships, and this is something that we could expand on in the future. As Dr. Martinez mentioned, the Hogg Foundation Mental Health Guide, there are so many resources that I know for a fact that others do not know about, and this is such a great opportunity to share those. So in this slide, we were sharing the CCA's Mental Health Resource Guide, and talking about all of the work that's being done that Judge Harvey mentioned earlier with the training of the various judicial educators. So next slide. I think that's it on the annual report, but we did print these. We have them bound, and we will share those with you when we're in person again. If you would like a hard copy, you can contact us and we will mail that to you. And I think that's it on the annual report. But thank you all for the work that's gone into that. Okay, can we go ahead to section? It's under tab 4, the projects by strategic plan. So you have seen this before. This is the strategic plan that we developed when we first became a commission. And I think it's good to revisit it and to see how our projects are fitting into our strategic plan and how we're carrying out our mission. I'd like to bring your attention to under collaborate, number 6. We have as a goal to examine the prevalence and impact of racial disparities for people with mental health needs, substance use disorders, and IDD in the court system. We show in parentheses what resource we leaned on to gather that goal. And so this is one of our goals that we touched on in our critical points roundtable, and we've had some discussion at our prior summits, but I wanted to let you know, with respect to the conversation that's happened today, that we do have a more intentional goal at this next summit. Kama Harris is leading that for us, and she might touch on this later, but we do have Dr. Rita Cameron Wedding. I know many of you know her, who is wonderful, who is going to speak on implicit bias and racial disparities, particularly with people with mental health or IDD needs. And we have also listened to our curriculum committee and heard that if we are going to look at the Stepping Up initiative and think about what data we're collecting, and we have this opportunity to revisit that and create what we would like to collect, that race and ethnicity need to be a part of that data collection. And so I will wrap up by saying we have a couple of new projects that Judge Specia is going to tell us about in his report. And we have those indicated in this under technology resources reports. And so we will continue to revisit our strategic plan to make sure that the projects that we are accepting, the grants that we are making, are aligned with what your vision was when we created the commission. Okay, so I think now we will talk about the work of the Legislative Research Committee. We have the chair of that committee, Justice Bill Boyce, to walk us through a few slides and give us some highlights from that report.
Christy, and why don't we go ahead and take our break? I know it was scheduled for 10:30, but I hate to interrupt in the middle of that report. And so why don't we go ahead? I have about 10:20. So why don't we break until 10:35 and reconvene at 10:35? And thank you very much for your report and for the work that you've done both on the report to the courts and in connection with our strategic plan. So we'll see everybody back at 10:35. All right, we're back from our morning break, and we're going to start back up with Justice Bill Boyce, who is the vice chair of our commission and has done incredible work in connection with the two task forces, one led by Justice Boyce and one led by Judge Carr, to explore and investigate ideas for a report to the Judicial Council and to the two courts about potential legislative asks for the upcoming session. He's going to give us a report about the work of those two task forces and walk us through a draft, hopefully a near final draft, although we've got a little bit of tweaking left to be done and wanted to get input from all of you before we submit it to the Judicial Council. So with that, I will turn it over to Justice Bill Boyce.
Thank you, Justice Bland. I want to begin by commending the Legislative Research Committee and the Commission as a whole for not missing a beat in terms of assembling very significant, meaty proposals, conducting meetings, really digging into the issues that the Commission exists to address, notwithstanding the disruptions of the last number of months. The process began with in-person meetings and seamlessly shifted to remote meetings, but it was seamless only because the work group chairs and all of the committee participants continued to work away without interruption or pause. And I particularly want to note that we've got 3 work groups that were formed to address particular aspects of the Legislative Research Committee's charge. The Competency Restoration Work Group that Professor Shannon has been leading the charge on, the Diversion Work Group that Judge Turner has been heading up, and the Services Work Group led by Judge Matthews. The product of these efforts over the last number of months really breaks down into 2 parts. The first part is a series of 11 specific legislative proposals that I will unpack here in a moment, with the thought that they will be presented to the Judicial Council for the Judicial Council's consideration and vote in terms of what it will recommend on behalf of the Judicial Council, really on behalf of the judiciary, as legislative proposals in the upcoming session. The second component of this is a services report that really focuses on identifying gaps and issues from a larger perspective, not just in terms of specific proposed legislative approaches or fixes, but really a larger system-wide analysis. And I think this is important and helpful because it demonstrates that the activities here cover both important aspects that this commission was created to address. One is making specific recommendations, and another is looking at the big picture and thinking about beyond the proposals for any one session, what are the issues we should be looking at? What are the areas that we should be approaching and unpacking those? And so I want to commend the work groups for the results that they have generated by their work, because all of this work promotes the goals that the commission itself was formed to address. I also want to acknowledge the comments that occurred Dr. Fabello's comments, and in a number of comments that have been made about both the legislative environment that is going to be in place in 2021 and the overall concerns about the role of the criminal justice system and law enforcement as part of larger discussions about how resources should be allocated and how things should be handled. I think what you're going to see is that these legislative proposals and the services discussions align very well with a larger discussion that really led to the formation of this commission in the first place. And that was a recognition that mental health issues often are addressed by default as a criminal justice issue and a law enforcement issue. And these proposals and the services analysis really try to get at looking at better ways to handle things than by default. In terms of priorities, the legislative priorities that we're going to review are not presented in any kind of a rank order. And I appreciate we heard differing views in this morning's comments about the need or utility of ranking specific legislative proposals. And I think a way to address that is number one, to invite comments about the proposals specifically or about how they should be ranked, to invite the interested parties to contact Christy Taylor with your comments, with your recommendations that the commission and the committee can take into account in terms of making sure that those views are presented to the Judicial Council. I think at the end of the day, I'm not sure if any ranking is going to occur, what form that would take, but to the extent it occurs, it is really, as I understand it, going to be the judgment of the Judicial Council, speaking as a policymaking representative for the judiciary as a whole, about which of these proposals it votes to pursue in the session, and any ranking or emphasis that gets placed on those proposals. We have 11 recommendations for legislation. They may all be adopted by the Judicial Council. Only a subset of them may be adopted by the Judicial Council, at least in the run-up and anticipation of the upcoming 2021 session. But that, whether it's all of them or a subset of them, I think this is an important process to identify specific recommendations for legislative changes. And so with that overview, I'm going to focus on first the legislative recommendations. And these appear at pages 7 through 9 of the report that was distributed ahead of today's meeting. I'm going to go through these relatively quickly in light of the time constraints. The overview is presented in the report with backup as the specific legislative language that is being considered. And so I invite you to review those and forward your comments in terms of reactions, concerns, questions, recommendations for the legislation proposals themselves, or a prioritizing of those or a ranking of those to assist the commission in its function. So turning to the specific legislative recommendations, starting on page 7 of the report that was issued, I'm going to go through these at a pretty high level because the report does an excellent job of explaining the basics and the rationale. But I think you can see that these fall into a couple of different groupings. The first two legislative recommendations on page 7 really focus on addressing gaps in procedures for cases involving Class C misdemeanors in justice and municipal courts, and looking to align procedures that exist in other circumstances and providing similar procedures and options for municipal and justice courts that are addressing Class C misdemeanors. One example of that is the proposal to amend Chapter 45 of the Code of Criminal Procedure to provide a procedure for dismissing complaints if an adult defendant is unfit to proceed, again, with appropriate procedures and safeguards. This would be a corollary to Section 8.08 of the Texas Penal Code addressing similar procedure in juvenile cases. Similarly, the second proposal is an amendment of Chapter 45 of the Code of Criminal Procedure to direct justice and municipal judges in Class C cases to proceed in the same manner prescribed under Article 26.13b of the Code of Criminal Procedure. And this goes to the issue of accepting pleas only when the defendant appears to be mentally competent to make such a plea. Shifting to the next grouping of proposals, legislative proposals, these are different facets of competency restoration, really proposals 3, 4, 5, and 6, appearing on page 7 and 8 of the report. And some of these are very focused technical proposed amendments to address timing issues and other issues that have been identified as needing refinement. The goal of expanding competency restoration and opportunities for competency restoration has been a continuing area of focus for the Commission. It's been a focus of prior legislative proposals that ultimately were passed. And I think what you see here are efforts to improve and in some cases fine tune based on work that's already been done. And so if you look at proposal 3, this would clarify when the time period for competency restoration begins, identifying it as the later of either when the date of an order being signed occurs, or when the services themselves begin. Proposal 4 looks to align the two pathways that have been created and developed for arriving at jail-based competency restoration, either through Health and Human Services programs authorized through that, or as implemented by individual counties. Proposal number 5 would mandate continuation of jail-based competency restoration while a defendant is waiting for an inpatient bed to open up. Proposal 6 would credit a defendant with good time credit for attending and participating in an outpatient competency restoration program. Turning to proposal 7, which appears on page 8 of your report, this expands on a concept that was developed and ultimately recommended and passed in terms of trying to make sure that the appropriate form of placement for court-ordered inpatient or outpatient mental health services is available. And so this would focus on providing a further step-down option again, with appropriate procedures and safeguards in place, under an order of civil commitment with a finding of violence, and add the option of step down to an outpatient mental health service provider to supplement the options that already exist under the statute. Proposal number 8 seeks to align expert qualification standards for experts who are providing guidance to courts on competency and align those expert qualifications with those that exist for insanity evaluations. Proposal number 9 addresses, again, I would identify this as a fine tuning of existing procedures, addresses the oath requirement for a personal bond for a person who's been released with treatment conditions or for competency restoration under 17.032, 1622, and Chapter 45. The basic point being that somebody who is receiving competency restoration services may not understand the significance of the oath that is required for a personal bond, the oath to show up and participate. And so proposal number 9 addresses that. Proposal number 10 is a tweak to previous changes and statutory developments relating to screening under Article 1622. We get feedback on how prior iterations of the legislation has worked. And one of the aspects of feedback that was received is that data collection is not feasible and or very time consuming for somebody who is no longer in custody. A very practical observation. And so proposal 10 seeks to address that. And then proposal 11 would amend Chapter 511 of the Government Code to require the Commission on Jail Standards to address rules, adopt rules addressing inmate access to medication, again, towards the goal of continuity of medication to maintain mental health and stability, recognizing the issue that's been identified that the overall goals of achieving mental competence are not going to be met or satisfied if somebody is receiving medication, but then that medication regimen is disrupted and they decompensate. With the remaining time I have, I'm going to shift to a discussion of the services recommendations, the services work group recommendations. And these appear at pages 14 through 28 of the report. And again, to underscore, these are less in the nature of specific legislative recommendations, although they certainly, some of them could encompass that, but more an effort to identify gaps in services and capacities. And what this is really doing, which I think is extremely beneficial, is putting the concerns and the activities of the court system within the picture of the larger systems in which it operates. Again, an underlying goal of this commission. And so I think this reflects a realization that procedures and practices in courts occur against a backdrop. They occur against a backdrop of available services in the community. They occur against a backdrop of housing availability for persons with mental illness or intellectual or developmental disability. A lot of intertwined issues that go beyond specific statutory changes to one specific provision. And so let's go through these. I can't do justice to the report, and I commend it to your reading. I can't do it justice with this overview summary, but I do want to identify the main parts that are covered here. And a lot of this has to do, for example, the first point identified, crisis services. A lot of this has to do with improving availability of information to courts and those working in courts about resources that are available. The Court of Criminal Appeals has done a wonderful job under Judge Hervey's direction to assemble the guide that it has already started. There are other local efforts to do that we've heard about. And I think this first point about crisis-related services really goes to the issue of trying to increase the dissemination of information to the people who need it about what crisis services are available, the different forms of those services, and what's available locally. A second topic focuses on the need for data to assess the efficacy of screening efforts. And this goes to a point that Dr. Fabello has made very eloquently in prior meetings. We've, over the course of multiple legislative sessions, have made significant efforts to improve screening. Part of the responsibility that goes along with that is to assemble the data to assess how well they're working and whether changes are needed. A third proposal focuses on multi-systemic therapy for youth. And I will commend the details of that to your reading in the report, but it is an exciting area, a developing area that I think warrants further attention and development to see how it can be implemented for our purposes here. Topic 4 covers diversion options for courts and law enforcement. Again, part of the communication function and making sure that all of the stakeholders who are involved have an understanding statewide and locally of the options that are available. Item number 5 addresses funding for outpatient and jail-based competency restoration. Obviously, in the current environment, and certainly the environment as it's developed over the last several months, funding is going to be a hot topic in the upcoming session. There's no doubt about that. There's also no doubt about the fact that sums spent to provide services to reduce the involvement in the criminal justice system of people with mental illness and intellectual and developmental disability is money well spent. It's spending money to save not just resources, but also to improve outcomes for everybody involved. Item number 6 involves, again, the notion of continuity of medication and improving the ability to make sure that psychoactive medication that is being prescribed is being provided uniformly while there is involvement in the system. Item number 7 involves providing guidance to Texas judges and stakeholders about the efficacy and availability of peer support services, a very important component, as we've learned from our stakeholders, about helping justice-involved persons to transition out of that justice involvement and into a better situation. Relatedly, item number 8 focuses on funding and development of programs for community reentry and life skills. Again, dovetailing with the notion that there needs to be a community ability to address the needs of persons even when their justice system involvement ends. Because if there is not such support and ability, the likelihood of reentry into the justice system is very high. Item number 9 focuses on the tailoring of mental health services for individuals with intellectual and developmental disability. This goes to a key point that Senator Zaffarini and others have repeatedly emphasized, which is there are multiple facets to the circumstances that we're addressing here. And care and attention need to be paid that the circumstances, the needs, the considerations for persons with mental illness are not necessarily the same in all circumstances. They're not the same for persons with intellectual or developmental disability. And not infrequently, there is an overlap. And those areas of overlap need to be identified and addressed. And then item number 10 of the services report addresses housing. Again, this goes back to the point that releasing somebody into the community without support, without supportive housing, without an ability to provide and find appropriate housing for them is a recipe for a return to involvement in the criminal justice system. And so with that overview, I will cede back my time to Justice Bland, but I will reiterate the invitation for comments and input on any and all of these proposals that don't appear here that should, and the ranking of them. Thank you.
Thank you, Justice Boyce. I am pinch hitting for Judge Carr today. Judge Brent Carr of Tarrant County led the Senate Bill 362 task force and put in so many hours and did a wonderful job. He unfortunately had a family emergency today. So I will go over the legislative proposals and the report that came out of this group. So if you're not familiar, briefly, I'll tell you that in the last legislative session, Senate Bill 362 directed the Supreme Court to create a task force that was specifically going to look at Chapter 573 to see if there were any rulemaking that could streamline the emergency detention process, and another broad charge of implementing measures to increase consistency and access to the judicial branch. So when this task force was created, they decided that there needed to be some legislative recommendations as well. They divided into 3 committees. So one was looking at the legislative recommendations, and one was looking at any technology solutions to emergency detention with warrant. And then a third group is looking at forms. That group, their work is still underway, and so it is not reflected in the combined report. So as Justice Boyce mentioned, we sent out this report. We've combined the work of both of these task forces to try to simplify this for the reader and for the legislature. Okay, so you see the slide. We have 6 legislative proposals coming out of this task force. The first is looking at a police officer's duty. I think this was something that we heard from Major Lee, that often police officers are asked to stay an untenable amount of time in our facilities and emergency rooms. And so this would propose that police officers would not have a duty to stay at a facility after they've delivered the person who's in a mental health crisis, with the requirement that they deliver the person with the proper documentation. So that's the first proposal. The second is also looking at 573.012 of the Health and Safety Code. this is with the judicial approval that's required. We would extend the group of people who can apply for an electronic application, of emergency detention warrant. So right now, doctors are statutorily authorized to contact judges to request this. And the amendment would increase this class to physician's assistants, nurse practitioners, psychologists, and then the certain master's level professionals and social workers who have clinical assessment authority. So that's the second. And I will point out that all of these proposals in this work group, the ideas were agreed upon. The bill language was not necessarily voted on, but Judge Carr was able to meet with the stakeholders and put forth some suggested bill language, and you find those in the appendices of the report. So the next proposal, this was from Judge Jan, who noticed that police officers did not have the authority to seize firearms when they were executing emergency detentions with warrant. So they had this ability when they were executing warrantless emergency detentions. And so this would be an amendment to make those two provisions parallel. The next proposal is about the elimination of bed letters. This is something that we had addressed in our bench book as a best practice. And so this group has recommended that we amend 574-022 of the Health and Safety Code, which would state that a judge may not refuse to sign or hear an order of protective custody because a bed is not available. And this is, I think, a practice that is in just some trial courts. And so the statute would make it more clear. Then the fifth proposal is to allow mandatory blood draws for individuals who are already admitted to state hospital and they are on involuntary psychoactive medications. It was a bit of an anomaly that the authority did not include the ability to do a blood draw to make sure that these patients are receiving the appropriate level. And some medications have checks of the kidney or the liver and things that you must do. And so this would now incorporate that authority to do the blood draw when the ability to have the medication administered involuntarily was ordered. Okay, and then the last proposal, the concept was clearly agreed upon in the task force, but the bill language has not been voted on. And so what Judge Carr did is he proposed 3 different suggestions, but we did make clear in the report that none of these were completely endorsed by the JCMH or the task force. So the situation that we were trying to address is when we hear about this all too often. I've heard it from members of this commission that someone is being picked up for emergency detention or an order of protective custody and has no criminal background, but in the process of being detained is possibly in a psychotic state and is combative and may have a reaction that then would create a felony. So someone who, did the family that did what they thought they were supposed to be doing and calling the authorities to get the emergency detention for, civil commitment, then this person leaves this situation with a felony. And it's a very difficult situation. Of course, we need to protect our public servants. So to balance all of this, Judge Carr has proposed in some bill language, just a step that would be a deferral of arrest, that when these defendants, well, they become defendants, but when these persons are receiving treatment from an emergency detention or order of protective custody, and they're non-violent offenders, that they would have the ability to stay and be stabilized before they were moved to being incarcerated. And so that is one option. And then Judge Carr added from the collection of suggestions of the group 2 other suggestions. And one would be to create an exception in this particular situation with great limitations, that instead of being a felony, this would be a Class A misdemeanor. And then another idea would be to create an exception defense, affirmative defense, or mitigation instruction in this scenario. Okay, we can go ahead and go to next slide. So those are the legislative proposals from the 362 task force. The last report in this combined report is on exploring technology solutions for emergency detention warrants. And you've heard a bit about this. The 362 task force was trying to gather some insight from the judiciary and other stakeholders on whether or not this is a technology solution is something that we would like to explore. The Office of Court Administration has talked about taking this and moving forward with it. Of course, all of that has been extremely set back by COVID and the demands that have been placed on David Slayton's office. But this report reflects important concerns and qualifications where the group would agree that they would want to explore a technology solution. The circumstance is in a hospital emergency room. We know that there are increasing numbers of mental health crises in the emergency rooms. And our hospital partners have explained that they have found themselves in a position where they have no authority to hold someone under emergency detention. And yet they are bound by EMTALA to stabilize a patient. So there could be a number of mistakes that could happen where a police officer inadvertently fails to provide the correct paperwork when they have brought someone in, or we've had reports that there are some jurisdictions where warrantless detention, that there's a reluctance to use that with law enforcement. It could also be that there are complications getting to the courts, that sometimes it has been difficult to access in a timely manner. And so the group explored the idea of looking into technology solutions that would allow hospitals to use technology to apply for a warrant very quickly. The group is definitely concerned about confidentiality and would want to make sure that if there was any sort of technology solution, that the information is protected and that we are following all statutes regarding privacy. And I will note there were 2 to 3 members that felt that the warrantless detention, emergency detention system works well. And rather than investing in another solution, that there could be a same investment in more education and enforcement of using warrantless emergency detention in these situations. And but the group overall felt positively that we should look further into other circumstances where technology has been used to make obtaining warrants a seamless process. So that is my Judge Carr impersonation. And now we'll move on to Judge DuBose, who has been our chair of our bench book for the last several years.
Good morning. So first, I want to thank Christy and her staff and all of the commissioners and collaborative members who have worked so hard on the bench book. I know Chrissy and her staff have borne quite the largest share of that burden, and they've done a fantastic job. I also would like to note and list how much I appreciate hearing from commissioners all across the state and from people all across the state about how they are dealing with mental health crises in the midst of this COVID pandemic. I would note that I'm in a small rural court. It has really highlighted the need for access to adequate internet connection for people in areas in which we experience poverty to be able to access these services digitally. I didn't realize how bad it was until this crisis happened. So moving on to the bench book, the second edition of our bench book has been very successful. As you know, the second edition added chapters on competency restoration. The plan for the next edition is to finish the sequential intercept model, adding insanity and reentry, and intercept 5, which would be community corrections. The bench book's available both in electronic and hard copy form. The electronic version can be found on the JCMH website under the resources tab. I think we distributed 500 bench books at the 2019 summit and have since printed 600 additional copies. Most of these copies have been distributed, but please reach out to us if you would like a hard copy of the bench book. We'd be happy to work with you on getting you one. And I know they're working on the juveniles section, and I think that's going to be covered in a separate report. So I'm going to turn it back over to you, Christy. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge DeBose, for tirelessly leading this immense project. And I will say, we also want to remind you that we have the code book that was begun by Chris Lopez at HHSC, and we have worked with LexisNexis to bind it. We have several of those that we can mail out to you, and our assistant Molly McNear has been wonderful about connecting, and will happily mail those to you. All right, so yes, we'd like to hear about the new juvenile bench book. It started as a section of the bench book, and it's so huge, it's going to have to be its own book. So Judge Cynthia Wheelis.
Thank you. I do want to thank Judge DeBose and your committee for actually starting the juvenile version, because we've just been the sincerest form of flattery in copying the intercept model. I would be remiss if I didn't thank Christy Taylor. I think that it should be noted that her vision, even when she was working for the Supreme Court on the Children's Commission, has been equity in juvenile justice. She is the genuine article on diversity's actual intrinsic value and benefit. So her work over the last decade on disparity and disproportionate impact on communities of color is the real deal. I also want to thank the Herculean efforts of Molly Davis. Oh my goodness, what an add to this commission. She has been tirelessly working behind the scenes on all of your contributions. I want to thank our many members of the Collaborative Commission and our many members of this commission on your work, your hard work on this juvenile version. The juvenile version of the Juvenile Justice Bench Book is following the same sequential intercept model, of course, adapted to juvenile procedures. The committee is made up of over 30 of the state's top experts in juvenile mental health and intellectual disabilities and developmental disabilities. The first edition is going to cover intercepts 0 through 3, including community services, initial contact with law enforcement, initial detention and detention hearings, and the courts. There is an emphasis on identifying points at which youth can be diverted from the juvenile justice system into community-based services, which I'm sure Adrian and others are so thrilled to hear. We are also doing a detailed section on juvenile fitness to proceed, which is like the competency restoration or competency to stand trial in the adult context, but is many faceted and has a third aspect to our insanity defense, if you will, which is to say that if the juvenile cannot conform their behavior to the laws, then we can also find them unfit to proceed, which is an incredibly important aspect or factor or element when you include both mental health and IDD. Because you can be fit to proceed in a competence manner, obviously, but not able to conform your conduct because of IDD or other mental health challenges. Sample motions and orders will be found throughout the book, as well as best practices. And finally, near and dear to my heart, as most of you who know me, and some of you on this commission deserve a shout out for your work in the area of implicit bias. Judge Specia, Judge DuBose, and Christy Taylor have worked for a decade on this issue, and I'm hoping I'm not missing anyone else. Oh, yes, and hoping I'm not missing anyone else who've been really so helpful on this issue. This book will contain guidance on reducing disproportionality in the juvenile justice system with little blocks of important thoughts and consideration for primarily judges, obviously, because it's a bench book, but also law enforcement and providers. So we're very happy, we're very grateful. I do want to give a shout out personally, because I didn't have a report per se, but from my neck of the woods, I want to thank Dr. Bill Schnapp, Dr. Keller, and Dr. Petrilla, and others who early on in this commission gave me the support to champion juveniles, that juveniles shouldn't be sidelined and that we should try to achieve equity. Justice Boyce was another one who early on gave adequate, in my opinion, and not putting juveniles out to pasture, if you will, which really historically has been the case. So I appreciate all of y'all's efforts and encouragement. And back to you, Christy and Molly.
Great, thank you, Judge Bayless. Yes, go ahead, Molly.
Thank you. My name is Molly Davis. I'm one of the staff attorneys at the commission, and I'm happy to report that the juvenile bench book will be available in print by the end of the year. We will have an electronic version of the bench book ready for you all to download from our website in late fall. So look for that in November around the same time as our summit. And future editions of the bench book will include the other intercepts 4 and 5, which will take us through the commitment to TJJD, if that happens, and then community re-entry points. If at any point you would like to be a part of this project, I will happily take you up on your offer to volunteer. Please contact me. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Molly. She has really been such a perfect fit. She came from Tarrant County and worked 6 years as an adult prosecutor, and then the past 6 in juvenile justice. And so that real life experience has been really helpful. Okay, so Judge Carr is the chair of the Summit Curriculum Committee, and he was going to tell you a bit about how that group got together and met and is planning our summit. But I'm going to pass it over to Kama Harris, is our staff attorney who is leading the work on the summit.
Hi, thanks, Christy. Good morning. I'm Kama Harris. I'm one of the new staff attorneys for the commission. Our 2020 Judicial Summit for Mental Health the planning is well underway. We have convened the curriculum committee. It's made up of a variety of stakeholders from across the state of Texas. So we have people from all levels of the judiciary, attorneys, doctors, educators. There's an array of expertise. And we met once in June, and it blew me away how much they added in the creativity and the innovative ideas that were really brought during that meeting. This summit is scheduled for November 9th and 10th, and registration is open on the JCMH website. You can click and register, and it will be a virtual summit. but we do have a production company that's going to be helping us. So I'm hoping that this really will be an entertaining and informative production, more like a production than a Zoom seminar. As far as the agenda goes at the summit, there's going to be a half day of learning, specifically spotlighting juvenile mental health law. And then this is, of course, in conjunction with the release of the new juvenile bench book. We're also going to have a half day focusing on intellectual and developmental disabilities. So this half day will consist of 3 separate panels who are going to follow a hypothetical individual through the sequential intercept model. And during that time, we're going to discuss best practices, services, issues specific to IDD law. So that should be really interesting. That's my favorite panel. I'm quite excited about it. And our curriculum committee is scheduled to meet again in November. And I'm excited to see what they have to say and where the summit goes this year. So I hope that you're all able to attend. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kema. And I think we already have maybe 500 people registered. So it really will be a wonderful opportunity to educate and connect. And we will take the opportunity to meet new folks that couldn't afford to travel in last time. So I wouldn't be surprised if we really have more than 500. Okay, so and now we're going to hear from our jurist in residence, Judge John Specia.
Thank you, Christy. I wanted to make one announcement. On August 21st here in San Antonio, they're having a conference, faith-based conference, Pathways to Hope, sponsored by our local NAMI. It's going to be completely virtual. And at this point, they have over 1,200 people registered from all over the country and all over the world. So, Adrian, I don't know if there are if it's open enrollment, but it's a great program and it's gonna. Okay. Christy, you just put a slide up. That's okay. Can y'all hear me? Can you hear me? I've lost my audio. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, sorry guys. My technology has been fighting with me all morning. The executive committee is considering 2 new projects. The first one would be a pilot project where we'd announce a request for proposal for a community forensic coordinator. County officials need a liaison with the local mental health authority, the state hospital, and other community resources to assist in the disposition of mental health and IDD cases in their courts. The community forensic coordinator would be that liaison employed by the local mental health authority, but working day to day in the courts. The coordinator would develop relationships and facilitate communication between courts, law enforcement, LMHs, state hospitals, and other agencies. And this would all be focused on decreasing the unnecessary incarceration of people with mental health or IDD. These kind of liaisons have been used in other restorative courts, and I think it's a great idea. A second project that the executive committee is considering is a grant to OCA for programming and web support. Among other objectives, the grants will help develop an online one-stop shop resource which will give the user detailed information for their county courts and incorporate information from the CCA's mental health resource guide. And it would be completely electronic, and perhaps even you'd be able to hover over a county and all the resources in that county would come up. In addition, we have put out 1 jurist in residence letter. We got lots of work going on. Hopefully we can put out 2 before the end of the year. And that's all I've got, Christy.
Thank you, sir. Okay, we have our financial report. If you turn to tab 5, I believe, yes, tab 5, Patrick Passmore is going to discuss our fiscal year 2021.
Thank you, Christy. If everybody has the financial report up, we're starting up at the top. We have that's our listed revenues as of now. As it was mentioned by a few of the commissioners in their updates, there was that 5% reduction. And there was a period of time that we went through where we were not going to have that additional $500,000 that we received in the rider for judicial mental health training. Fortunately, we have since been exempt from that 5% reduction, and now are going to be going into 2021 with a considerable increase from what we had originally anticipated during that time. So we're going to start 2021 with approximately 1.73 million. As you scroll down the screen there, you can see what we anticipate spending on operating. The grants that we have identified thus far in this process, we do have additional funds available to be granted out, and those are going to be determined at a later date. The budgets right now are really just estimates with everything that's going on with the pandemic. A lot of our conferences and things have been canceled, but we were able to encumber many of those funds because a lot of those programs that we had anticipated for 2020 are already under contract and obligated. So fortunately for us, we're going to be able to continue to carry that forward and continue the projects, hopefully, that we had for 2020 in 2021. Just not very sure of the time frame for that to all start yet. Sorry, my Siri for some reason is thinking I'm talking to her. I apologize. So as we move down, you can see we've allocated some funds for judicial and attorney stakeholder scholarships, totaling $15,000. Those are going to cover things if our commissioners, collaborative counsel, if there's a program or some kind of training that they would benefit from, we've always set aside some funds there to allow for that. Moving on, as Christy and Kama and Molly had addressed, you can see those staff-directed projects. Those first three there have already been covered. And then Legislative Research Committee, we believe, is not going to require that much money moving forward into 2021. As always, we aim to have a zero budget. We want to get as many of these funds that are available for the Judicial Commission on Mental Health to those organizations and through projects. We'd like to spend it all. But as I mentioned before, it's just a very uncertain time. We're not sure what to expect going into 2021 or through 2021. So this is all the subject to change, and it's just a best estimate right now of what we anticipate. And if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer. All right, well, that's all I have.
Yep. Thank you, Patrick. So I believe we are wrapping up. Judge Hervey, Justice Bland. I did want to add one thing, that we realized a few minutes into the meeting that the streaming service was buffering and having technical difficulties. So apologize to our collaborative council members and guests. And this was the first time we've done this, so we really appreciate your patience. And we are glad you were able to join on Zoom, and we'll have the bugs worked out next time.
I want to thank everybody for their participation today, and I hope to see everybody at the summit. And we will keep you informed of any special dates, and keep up the good work. We're proud of all of you. Thank you so much.
I just want to note that the report that was shared for our legislative proposals and that was shared both in the chat box and ahead of the meeting today is a draft report. So it's not for wide distribution until we've finalized and had the opportunity to present it to both courts and to the Judicial Council. But if you have comments or tweaks that you see that you would like to let us know about, please email Christy as well as Judge Hervey and me so that we can take those into consideration as we finalize that report. I just want to thank Christy and her team and all of you. It has been an amazing effort that I've just been witness to over the last few months in developing our projects, continuing the good work that the Commission has been doing, but also exploring new avenues to make a difference. And we really can't do it without your help. And we know there's lots of demands on your time. So we appreciate you devoting some of your time to this effort. I hope that you guys have a great rest of your summer. We're going to be in touch with you about our future commission meetings. And in the meantime, if you ever have any questions, please reach out to me, Judge Hervey, or to Christy Taylor. We'll be happy to help. Thank you so much.
Stay safe, everyone. Good. Done.
Making monthly doing the right thing, and it's become your family's heart and soul. Well, that investment can give you tax-free cash just when you need it.